My name is Antoinette Hallam, and I am the Access Program Manager, and with me is the whole entire assessment team, including our Director, Lori Hernandez. In this session, we will be focusing on an overview of the WIDA Access Assessment. Our goal is to provide clarity, updates, and helpful reminders so that you feel confident and prepared for successful testing. Now, before we get started, I want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and any supporting materials or links will be shared with you during the webinar and will be dropped in the chat. So you can revisit the information or pass it along to colleagues who couldn't attend. So with that, let's dive into our overview of the WIDA Access. Okay, federal and state laws require schools to assess English learners each year to determine their English language proficiency and to make sure that they are making progress toward full proficiency. This means that every student who is identified as an active English learner in our districts must participate in the annual English Language Proficiency Assessment, or ELPA, test. This assessment is essential for monitoring growth, meeting legal requirements, and ensuring that our students receive the appropriate supports that they need. Okay, today we'll cover everything that you need to know for the 25-26 school year, including how we identify EL students for testing, WIDA Access updates and key dates, both new and existing resources, training and certification, proficiency criteria, and professional development opportunities. We will walk through each topic and hopefully have time at the end for any questions that you may have. Okay, on this slide, I'm explaining the three-step process for identifying the student as an active English learner. The first step is the Home Language Survey, or the HLS, which is a mandatory questionnaire used to determine if the student might need English language services and is a potential EL. All students enrolling or returning or transferring back to a district must have an HLS completed. But it is important to know that families must not complete it annually if the student remains in the same district. The HLS must contain key information or several required components such as student details, and it also must include the 3 required questions, though districts may add additional questions if they choose to. The EL Guidebook provides a full list of all the required components on the HLS, and it can be collected or archived as paper or an electronic version as long as all the components are included. If the survey indicates that a language other than English is used at home, the district then moves to step 2, which is the follow-up family interview. Step 2 provides more detail on the student's language background. To support staff and districts, we offer resources such as the parent interview guidance video, tips for conducting a family interview, which you can see the different resources here. And we also have an example of interview questions. Okay, these resources can help educators understand the process, adapt it to the different families and situations, and supporting interviews to be effective and considering cultural responsiveness of our families. If the interviewer concludes that there is enough of a language influence, then you will proceed to step 3. Step 3 is an approved WIDA English Language Proficiency Screener, which assesses the student's English skills to determine final eligibility for EL services. Together, these 3 steps ensure a thorough process for identifying and supporting English learners. Okay, recent updates to the Access assessments have brought several important changes. The assessments have been renamed and no longer include the term ELLs in their titles. The former names, WIDA Access for ELLs, Access for Kindergarten for ELLs, and WIDA Alt Access for ELLs, have been replaced with clearer, more identifiable titles. So it's now the WIDA Access Online, WIDA Access Paper, WIDA Access for Kindergarten, and WIDA Alt Access. These updated names make it easier to identify the correct assessment for each student, and WIDA was included since many people were already referring to it as the WIDA test. Okay, here are the important upcoming dates for WIDA testing. The WIDA AMS test setup is open for registrations from late November through early March, so make sure all students are registered during this period. Districts will receive their test materials in early January, and there's an additional window to order more materials from early January to late February. The access testing window runs from late January through the end of February, and all completed test materials must be shipped back to DRC by March 3rd. Staying on top of these dates will help ensure a smooth testing process. Okay, on our next slide, to exit EL services using the Access English Language Proficiency Test, students must meet two required scores. A composite score of a 4.6, which is calculated from the domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing results, and a literacy score of a 4.3, which combines the reading and writing performance. Access measures students' proficiency across these English language domains, and students must meet both requirements to exit EL services, demonstrating that they are ready to succeed in education classes without additional language support. On this slide, we're looking at the proficiency level criteria for the ALT Access assessment, which is a proficiency level 3. The ALT Access is designed for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, ensuring that every student's abilities are fairly assessed and helping educators tailor instruction to each student's strengths and needs. Again, it assesses the 4 key language areas of language development and domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The Wyoming English Learners at a Glance entry and exit criteria resource is a 2-page quick reference that shows the criteria for entering and exiting the active English learner status. It brings together all the key information from all the WIDA screeners, WIDA Access and ALT Access assessments, including the required scores and the composite proficiency levels for all of the assessments. The goal is to give educators one simple place to check how the EL identification and exit decisions are made. So you can access this resource on the Access webpage, but we're also inserting this link into the chat. Next, I am going to give a brief overview of the purpose of the WIDA checklist. The WIDA checklist is a step-by-step guide to everything involved in access testing. It is an essential resource that is often underused and one of the best tools available for anyone conducting, coordinating, or administering the assessment. So when districts and test administrators use it consistently, it ensures that no tasks, no deadlines, or required procedures are missed before, during, or after testing. It includes detailed timelines, assigned staff responsibilities, test security requirements, and clear instructions for handling and returning materials. It also provides Wyoming state-specific guidance and policies, giving districts and test administrators the direction that they need to implement the access testing accurately and consistently. Our next slide is on, oops, it looks like we got a slide here moved. Proficiency level descriptors. We're looking for the pre-ID labels. But I can't, there we go. Okay, our next slide is on the pre-ID labels. Districts report their English learner students in October through the WD 684 and their SIS system, which the state then uses this information to create a pre-ID file and sends it to the WIDA DRC to create pre-ID labels before testing. This pre-ID file includes demographic and identifying information for each EL student, and WIDA DRC uses it to print personalized barcode labels or pre-ID labels for access testing materials. These labels help ensure accurate student-to-test matching and make test administration more efficient. So when pre-ID labels are delivered, will be included in the materials shipment that goes out on January 5th through the 8th. Students who were not reported in that October WD 684, such as those students who enrolled later in the year, will not receive a pre-ID label, and their demographic information will just need to be hand-filled or bubbled in. Okay, we have the new WIDA language charts. It looks like a couple of our slides got a little mixed up here. The key updates, can we find those key updates for Access training this year? There we go. Now, our key updates for Access training this year, we do have new assessments, the WIDA Access and the WIDA Access for Kindergarten. Because these tests are new, everyone administering them needs to be certified, even if you have done this training and were certified last year. There is a new policy of certification also that is now required every year. So instead of every other year for all test administrators, for all training, so everyone can stay current. So in terms of training content, there are also some updated speaking scoring rubrics for grades 1 through 5, the scoring access paper, and also in grades 6 through 12, the scoring access paper. These updates help to ensure that we are scoring consistently and accurately across all grades.
Antoinette, I apologize for interrupting you. There is a question in the chat. Do you want to save questions until the end or address as they come up?
I think we have plenty of time, so this would be a good time to answer any questions.
Okay. Do you want me to read it out loud?
Yes, please.
Okay. Alicia Wagner asked, for students not identified in October, will there still be the yellow school labels that need to be used in addition to bubbling in information?
That is a great question. Yes, if students do not have pre-ID labels, you will need to use those yellow labels as well. Any other questions?
Antoinette, this is Alicia again, and I just want to clarify for others on the call. If you did not order materials for a school and they have a new student, those yellow labels will not come with your materials, and we should reach out to you, correct, to get those yellow labels for that specific school?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alicia, for that clarification. So yes, if you reach out to me, then we can get those labels ordered if you do not have those. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments anybody would like to make? Okay, we'll go ahead and go on. If you have any other questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. Okay, now on this slide, as you have heard, the upcoming standard setting process will take place in July 2026 with educators and WIDA partners playing a key role in this process. This is very important because it will determine the new proficiency level cut scores. These cut scores are aligned not only with the updated test itself, but also with the revised academic language expectations for students. The outcomes of this standard setting will influence how English language proficiency is understood starting in the 26-27 school year. Okay, we have the next slide talks about test administrators. They are required to complete the WIDA training and certification before administering assessments. On September 1st, the WIDA Access training became available in the WIDA Secure Portal. On the 29th, the redesigned WIDA Access for Kindergarten training, which covers both the administration and refresh scoring, was also made available on the WIDA Secure Portal. Now, while WIDA recommends completing training closer to the actual WIDA Access testing window, to ensure the information is fresh, the trainings are accessible now and TAs may complete them at a time that works best for their schedule. Okay, now let's talk about a new accommodation for kindergarten students with low vision called the Low Vision Script, or LV Script. This script helps students access the test in a way that meets their visual needs. When deciding what to use, think about whether the student needs large print, the LV script, or both. LEAs can order the test administrator script for low vision students during the AMO window, so everything is ready for testing. And the AMO is the additional materials ordering window. For guidance on how to use this accommodation, there are a lot of resources that I have included on this page. You have the Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. There is the Kindergarten Access Training Course, the WIDA Access Test Administrator Manual, and then there was also an updated assessment webinar from November 2025 that is posted in the WIDA Secure Portal that also provides more information. Okay, next I want to highlight some additional important updates on assessments, accommodations, and resources. The Braille test does now include a speaking domain, which helps get a more complete picture of students' skills. There is also updated family flyers, so families have a clear, up-to-date information about the assessments and all of the supports that are available. For the Access Online platform, there is also now translated test administrator scripts and American Sign Language videos to better support students and families. And for the first time, there will be reports that can include a less than 4 domains score calculation for students who participate in fewer domains. Okay, in this slide, we are talking about accommodations that aren't in the WIDA Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. We need to be careful because if accommodations are used that are not in the manual, they can invalidate student assessments. So we have the Wyoming SARE system, which allows districts to request exceptional accommodations for students whose IEP or 504 plan requires supports that are not covered in the Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. Once a need is determined, the EL district or building coordinator can submit a request at any time while actually the SARE system opened on September 2nd, and it will remain open, and districts can submit requests at any time while that system is open. We often get calls asking whether a certain accommodation is allowed. So if you're not sure, the safest approach is just to submit a SARE request. Okay, in our next slide, I want to highlight a few key updates in the WIDA AMS for this school year. First, we have paper streaming audio for listening and speaking. For Access Paper tests, you can now stream the audio instead of using CDs. You'll see this option when setting up tests. This is only for Access Paper. Nothing changes for Braille or for the screener paper. CDs will still be shipped, so you will still have both options. Next, there is a new export in WIDA AMS, and this will help to identify students who aren't included in a test registration. It's an easy way to make sure that every student is registered for all the domain tests that they need. And then finally, we do have what's called the removal of the accommodation domain filter. And this lets you remove a specific accommodation from multiple students all at once. So instead of updating each one individually, this saves time and it makes managing accommodations a lot easier. These updates are designed to make the test setup and student management smoother, faster, and more accurate. Okay, some other updates on the screener web pages. WIDA has combined all of our 3 screener pages, the online, the paper, and the kindergarten, into one streamlined web page. So this makes it much easier to find because everything now is in one place. There's also a brand, I'm sure you all have heard of this because we have received quite a bit of calls, but there is also a brand new WIDA Alt Screener webpage, which I will talk a little bit more about. Plus, we have some other resources, the WIDA language charts that clearly show language proficiency levels. And for families, you'll now see new resources to share with your families. There's a section, so supporting students at home, and those resources are available. On the technology side, the DRC Insight Secure Browser desktop icon got its update, its first one in quite a bit of years. So starting in June, when devices are updated to that version 16, the new shortcut will appear automatically, and which will make it easier for both students and teachers to access the platform. And these updates, again, are all about making resources easier to find, testing simpler to access, and just helping families stay informed and involved. Okay, talking about the WIDA Alt Screener, we've had a lot of questions about this. So the information is there is a new WIDA Alt Screener. It is designed to help English learners with the most significant cognitive disabilities. This screener provides a new way to ensure that all students are accurately identified and supported in their language development. For those interested, there is, again, the WIDA Alt Screener webpage. It does offer resources. You can gain some general information about this screener and how it works. However, we would like to note that Wyoming will not provide local guidance or implementation procedures until they are fully developed and ready, and we will not adopt the screener until the 26-27 school year. This timeline ensures that Wyoming has sufficient time to create the guidance and make sure that all staff are fully prepared and supported before the actual use of the screener. I'm always excited to share that WDE is offering a variety of WIDA English Learner professional learning opportunities for the 25-26 school year. These are designed to help you support ELs effectively and prepare for the WIDA Access assessments. We offer options to fit different schedules and learning styles, including we have some self-paced workshops, facilitated virtual workshops. We also have WIDA assessment webinars, and we also include in-person trainings. Many of these sessions are recorded and uploaded to the WIDA Secure portal, so you can watch them anytime, or you can revisit them for up to a year. You can find a full list. We are projecting the list, or projected the list of the opportunities for this year. And I believe the link is also dropped into the chat for access as well. But we do encourage you to explore and take advantage of these resources to strengthen your skills in supporting English learners. Okay, now if we can go back up to the proficiency level descriptors. There is a slide that got moved in here, actually a couple of slides. I do want to highlight the proficiency level descriptors, if we can locate that. I think it was, there we go. Okay, so we do have PLDs, and these are kind of like the cousins of the can-do descriptors I've heard them referred to. We do have them both for the WIDA Access and the WIDA Alt Access. These descriptors show educators where students are in their English language development across the 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and they are part of the 2020 WIDA Standards Framework. PLDs break down what students can typically understand and produce at each proficiency level, which makes it easier to interpret your assessment results and understand what meaningful growth looks like for each learner. So if you've ever wondered, what does it really mean for a student to be at a certain level? What does the level 2, level 3, level 4 look like? Then these PLDs provide that clarity. These descriptors also guide the development, or can be used during your IELPs, helping to set developmentally appropriate measurable goals that are aligned with your students' current abilities. So they are essential tools for planning instruction, monitoring progress, making informed decisions, and scaffolding grade level content for our English learners. And I know we just had a glance of our WIDA Alt Access also. Now, if we can also go to the other slide that talks about the WIDA language charts. This is another new resource for this year. Thank you. That I want to highlight as well. The charts are a brand new resource that also can help educators understand and communicate the expectations of the revised access assessment. And the purpose of these charts, again, is to make connection between classroom instruction, the WIDA Access Assessment, and the WIDA ELD Standards Framework 2020 edition. It does help to clarify the proficiency level descriptors, which we just saw, so teachers can more easily understand what language development looks like at each level. And it bridges the PLDs with classroom activities, showing teachers what students can do and how instruction can intentionally support their language growth. They are, again, a helpful tool when creating IELP goals because they give concrete, appropriate language expectations to build from. Okay, our next quick but important update regarding the WIDA Client Services Center. They have a new email address. So if you or anyone else sends emails to the old address, don't worry, as those messages will still reach WIDA while they make this transition. But you'll want to make sure that you update your documentation and any contact list that you have to reflect this new address, and any other changes that I've mentioned, such as the new names for the WIDA Access, which has been updated and with this email has started to be used since September. And then on this slide, I just want to highlight some other key resources that are essential for supporting English learners, managing assessment requirements, and accessing professional development. First, we have the WIDA Wyoming EL page. And this is where you will find all the important dates for the Access English Language Proficiency Assessment. It's also placed towards the bottom of the page where you can see the professional development as well. So there's multiple areas where you can find many of our resources. The Access and Alt Access webpage. Okay, that one may have not been updated in there, but that page provides additional information about these assessments, including test administration guidance and accommodations and resources to support both educators and students during testing. And I do know we have the EL guidebook in there. So if you have, there we go. The EL guidebook provides comprehensive information on a wide range of EL topics. This includes guidance on identifying English learners. There's a lot more information in there. Understanding language instructional educational programs and services, or LIPs. There's a whole list of the various programs, reporting requirements, among other EL topics. And our next link, if we can open up the EL webpage. Okay, this is another resourceful site that offers materials for supporting families. Again, we have links to professional development and additional resources to help educators and districts meet the needs of EL students. We also have several forums on this page as well, or on this, if we can go back to the PowerPoint, we also have several forms that are important to know. We have the request to regenerate a domain test. And this is used when a domain test needs to be regenerated for a legitimate reason. And so, calling us and saying, I think the student just wasn't motivated enough and they could do better, that probably wouldn't get an approved request to regenerate. But, if there were technology issues and those kinds of things, usually we contact DRC and they're able to give us some of the analytics, and then we're able to regenerate a domain test. The other link that we can look at is the Access and Alt Access Irregularity Report form. And this should be completed if there are any kind of irregularities that occur before, during, or after an access or a screener test administration. And again, if you're not sure, you can always contact me and ask about that. And then we have the student not tested form. This is required for any student who did not complete a domain test or the full assessment. And for whatever reason, they were either absent and didn't complete one of the domains. We also require this for students who arrive maybe at the last day and they weren't able to test. We still need you to complete this form. And we also have the IELP in there, which is a template designed to help districts create an individualized plan for all active English learners. And this ensures that each student's educational needs are being addressed and documented in here. And specifically for the assessment, we need all of those accommodations and supports that will be needed for testing to be documented in here as well. But you can review the template and provide or adapt it to your individual students' needs. And I believe we went through the majority of those links. All of these resources are meant to support both educators and students Again, ensuring that our English learners receive the services and support that they do need to succeed. Okay, do we have any questions? I know this was quick, but we had a lot of information to share quickly.
We have a
Antoinette,
question.
this is Alicia. I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you.
I have a few teachers who did their certification like on August 20th, and they have that WIDA Access Online Administration certification, but it wasn't the one that was updated on September 1st. Do they need to redo that? Yes.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Okay, thank
that
you.
training, thank you. That was a good question. Unfortunately, that will include not the updated training.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Alicia.
for future reference, WIDA is pretty consistent about that September 1st being the time when they roll over all of those. So it might be a positive thing to just make sure that everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Okay, Antoinette, we have a few questions in the chat.
Sure.
The first is from Christina Bradford. She asks, should districts use the SARE system to submit requests for WIDA accommodations that require prior state approval, such as extended testing of a domain over multiple days, EM?
Yes.
Yeah. You would complete the SARE system for that as well.
Thank you, Christina. David Day wrote that I have questions about family interviews. David, if you'd like to unmute yourself and give us details about that or put those in the chat, please, we will respond to them.
Thank you. Just some clarification and direction on the family interview. I know it's somewhat subjective. I guess at what point, I guess I'm asking the group here, the panel, suppose you get a student that says, the parent says, from birth to age 3, this student heard Spanish at home, and then the Spanish-speaking parent's no longer in the picture. He shows up as a kindergartner, hasn't heard Spanish for 2 years, but the first 3 years of his life he did. Would you screen that student? And then I have a lot of other scenarios that are, generally it's a slam dunk. It's easy to know. But sometimes it is tricky and you're like, man, I don't know if that's enough of an influence of a second language to warrant screening. In that scenario, what do you guys think?
Anybody want to take that? Or I mean, I can start by saying that each interview and each situation is very individualistic. I mean, our students are, not easily grouped as a as a single group and with similar characteristics, but there's so many different variables. And that's why we ask that districts use a person with the experience and the expertise to be able to identify, the extent of the language influence. It can't just be anyone in the district. And so you would look at, definitely that was, or most likely had an impact on the student's language development, English language development. And so through that interview process, you would have to find, what was that influence in that student's language? How much Spanish did they learn? How much did they speak? How much were they able to understand?
And
Anybody else?
The only thing that I would add, like Antoinette said, use someone who knows what they're doing and has that experience during the family interviews. But I think the immediate answer is always default to interview. Like it's always the safest bet to jump straight into that family interview and then use that professional judgment based on the knowledge that you gain from both the student and the parent to determine whether or not screening is appropriate. But we would err on the side of caution and interview instead of not interview as much as possible.
Well, we interview, that's where we get that information. I wonder do you mean default to give the screener?
No, I just meant because there are some districts who who, question like, well, maybe they shouldn't interview because they think the student speaks fine
Oh,
in
gotcha.
their piece. And we like to say, make sure you do the interview if anything on that home language survey does that. So I just wanted to kind of make that first clarification. And then like Antoinette said, that professional judgment, because there is a detriment, especially down in those low levels, to screening when they might not necessarily need to be screened, because you might be, especially in kindergarten, you might be picking up on, just a delay in cognitive processes, or an
Mhm.
IEP student who maybe just hasn't been identified yet. Your EL timing and federal requirements for screening and reporting are much faster than what they are for IEP determinations. And so we get a lot of EL override cases down the line where the answer to some of them are, oh, they really should have been identified as an IEP student, not necessarily as an EL student early on for whatever reason. And so utilizing that professional judgment and making the best call in support of the student and their language development based on that home survey is definitely going to be the call that we make on an everyday basis.
And David, if you're kind of on the fence on, yeah, we can screen the student, or, maybe we don't need to screen the student, I'm kind of like half and half, I would, I would screen the student if you're right in the middle. Like, well, I'm not sure, maybe not. At the worst case scenario, the student will receive some services and might not have needed the services, but I think it would be worse if the student needed the services and you didn't screen the student and the student struggled. So, I would consider that. And then we do have processes in place now where if a student was misidentified or shouldn't, have been identified, then we do have those processes in place now too.
Yeah, I mean these instances are rare, but every year invariably we have some. Like one is we have a visit from grandma 3 months a year while her visa is valid and she speaks all Spanish. Is that enough? And the student, speaking Spanish with them, they can understand, but they can't really produce. And it's just 3 months a year, and that's tricky.
It is tricky,
Yeah.
but we can identify, this is always something to remember, is a student can be identified as an English learner if they have that receptive ability, but not the expressive, but if they're hearing, grandparents maybe as an example speak Spanish all day long and they're able to respond, and this is, influencing their, English language development. And, I mean, every case is so individual and different with so many variables.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Antoinette, a couple of more questions. The first comes from Carrie Thiel. Hopefully I said that right, Carrie. She said, I have an 11th grade student on an IEP, and we held his meeting last night, and he asked if he would be able to attempt to test out of EL services before the access test is given in January. Is there an option to offer them to test out other than the access test given annually? He missed the composite score by 1/10 of a point to test out and met the literacy component to test out.
Yeah, unfortunately, as we mentioned in this presentation today, the only way to exit a student is to score proficient on the access or the alt access. Hopefully that student will be able to meet the proficiency criteria this year.
Carrie responded, said, okay, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. We have another question from Sarah Salsi. Sarah wrote, in my district, I was directed by the MLL director to screen a student, even though he had been in the U.S. since kindergarten and had been using English for at least 4 years. Sarah, are you asking if that would be appropriate to screen the student?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
So that was just a comment in regards to David Day, who was not sure about screening, and that was just the guidance I had gotten from Stella Noel. And he tested proficient in the screener. So he's not not receiving services. I just mentioned that as a possibility.
Thank you, Sarah, for clarifying that. David, hopefully that's helpful, that information.
Yep, thank you.
I had a quick question. We are working on trying to add into our letter the graduation rate for our EL students, but when we've looked, we can't find a place because we don't have very many where it shows that. Are we expected to calculate that in some way, or where can we access that number on the state website?
So-
Rebecca, is there-
Yep. So there is in the same system where you get your access confidential reporting and that WDE confidential reporting, usually EL coordinators have access to the site, but not necessarily all of the reports within that site. So you might need to go to a district level and talk to someone, but there is an accountability side of that portion that does calculate your graduation rates. And within that portal somewhere, you should be able to kind of filter down to your English language students and be able to look at their graduation rate. And if that is something that whoever you need to look into with access to that you need help with, our IM team can help anyone find that information and how to kind of function and filter. They updated that to be an active HTML site, so there's lots of extra filters and stuff on it recently, and so they can call Colton Zier here at the department to get some extra help figuring out how to get down to that really fine detail. But that won't be filtered by those public reporting numbers. So like anything under 10, we can't report publicly.
Right. And I think that's what we were looking at, and we didn't have anything listed there. So that's helpful to me to know where to, okay.
In the confidential, it runs it by student. And since it's a confidential, you have to sign in, you get all of the data instead of the filtered data.
Okay, thank you.
And Michaela, since you're the EL district coordinator, you have access to that. As I know,
She has access to the access confidential piece. She might not have access to the accountability side of that. So if you don't see an accountability confidential piece at the top, then go to your district and talk to either your registrar or your WISE coordinator or someone who might have access to the accountability data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Quick question about access with the growth score goal, with the growth goal. Does that change if a student backslides and let's say 2024 they get a 3.0 and then the next year they go back and they get a 2.0? Does their original growth goal stay put, or does it recalibrate based on their new lower score?
Their end target stays the same, but they should recalculate on that, David. I'll double check on that, but I'm pretty sure it recalculates.
And I just put Colton's name and number in there. He's the one who runs a lot of those reports, so that he might also be able to answer that.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Are you talking about the reports for the graduation rates for the prior question or for me?
Both.
Great.
I dropped it in for the graduation rate, but he also calculates those growth pieces for us. So he should be able to help with that as well.
Okay, do we have any other questions? We are still here for.
I had one, Antoinette, real quick. That's Kim Jones. Can you clarify the alt access exit criteria? On the slide, it looked like the exit criteria is a composite of P3, but on the bottom part of the slide, it said students must meet both criteria.
Oh, nope, sorry,
just one?
that was a mistake. Just the P3.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good catch. Thank you. Okay, we are still here. If you have any other additional questions, we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I have one more question, sorry. Can you guys give some examples of what would circumstances be for a student who may be eligible for the accommodation? It's approved by WIDA, but it has to be approved by the state for extended testing of a domain over multiple days. What would conditions for that maybe be? We're having some people that are grappling with that.
So if the student had something in their IEP that says the student needs to test for multiple days due to a disability, then that was something that, you know, you would want to consider.
Yeah, and those are really going to fall under those same IEP guidelines if they would have been given that test over multiple days or test with an extended time to the point where that extended time would naturally mean that it happens over multiple days. That you would get that, and we really default to the IEP team on that. So more often than not, if that just that accommodation section of the IEP shows that they need it and that the IEP team determined that they need it. We see that frequently with alt students, just because of their cognitive delays. So I would imagine alt access students would also be where that most frequently appears as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
No problem.
And we can stay on here a little bit more, but I just want to say that we do truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here today. And on this last PowerPoint slide, we do have the list of all of our assessment teammates. So if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to anyone listed on this slide. We're always happy to help. And I also want to say thank you so much for all that you do for our students and our English learners, but we can still stay on a little bit longer if you have any other questions.
I'm sure you already said this, but I missed the beginning. When will this slideshow be available for us to see?
I should have them uploaded here in the next couple of weeks. So we just got to send them through our comms team to get them uploaded to the YouTube site, and then the recording will be posted to that Assessment PD website, usually in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
And as far as the growth targets, I did receive information, verification that we do recalculate every year those growth targets based on that information of what they receive, regardless if they meet their progress target that year or not.
Antoinette,
So that might mean that, you know, in kindergarten, they're expected to pass in 5 years. Depending on how things go, that could be extended to 6 or 7 based on what they do in those first 5 years.
Yes, there is an adjustment for students who are expected. Yes, there can be an adjustment, but then they do become a long-term English learner at that point.
Okay.
Antoinette, we have another question in the chat from Michelle Copeland. Asks, what is the process to remove a student that was misidentified?
So the EL guidebook has quite a bit of information on that, but that I'd be happy to share some information here. We have a system called the EL Status Manager, and I can help anyone to complete that process if you need some help. But you will complete a request for a reclassification in that system, and we have identified 7 reasons to go into the EL Status Manager and request a change in the student's category.
And all of those reasons and kind of like explanation and steps are listed in that EL guidebook.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
All right, we are coming up on the end of our time. So again, if you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute. We will be hopping off here in just over 3 minutes. But we're happy to answer any questions you have in the meantime.
Good morning. This is Kathy Good. This year we had a number of students who qualified as EL that are foreign exchange students also. Do you have any guidance in terms of you writing their goals? And we kind of expect that they're going to come in with higher levels of English than they did. Do you just have any general guidance for us on that?
Foreign exchange students, come from so many different countries and places, and their English language proficiency also varies. And so I would look at their level, their proficiency level and their needs, and kind of go from that. I know that the program has an English language proficiency test, and sometimes they do qualify for services because their test is quite different and the requirements different than the screeners, the WIDA screeners. And so I would suggest using the resources that WIDA provides, some of the resources that were mentioned on the slide, such as the proficiency level descriptors and the language charts that are new. And I would use some of those resources to help, create those goals for the language goals for the students.
Thank you.
Kathy, one thing I learned from a foreign exchange student is oftentimes take their tests that they've taken, with a grain of salt from their home country. The companies that are placing them are incentivized to place them. That's how they get paid. And so oftentimes the tests are easier, or they'll grade it a little easier so the student passes so they can come to Wyoming. And so I was also shocked to see, how did this student, how were they able to pass this test to come here? They had, not a lot of English. Some of them are speak very well and they passed the screener, but I did learn that from a student once.
We are definitely seeing that this year. It's definitely been different from previous years for sure.
Yeah, that's a great question though, because I think foreign exchange students, a lot of times they want to, come to the United States or another country just for that cultural experience, and we still have to look at their academic goals and their language and some of the other goals that they may have.
And it has caused some consternation with other teachers. I think a lot of times they're patient with the ones who are moving here and living here, but different expectations there. So yeah, I'm walking a line every once in a while.
Yeah, understandably. Okay. We appreciate all the wonderful questions again. Thank you for attending our test talk today. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions other than the ones that were asked today, please always feel free to reach out to any of us on the assessment team.
Have a great day, everyone.